You spent 5 seasons rooting for a serial killer, and I need you to understand something. That wasn't a mistake you made, it was the design. Someone built it on purpose, and it worked on almost everyone who watched. His name is Joe Goldberg. He'll tell you he did it all for love. He's lying. Not about the feeling, about the word. Because what Joe calls love, psychology calls something with a much colder name. And by the end of this file, you'll never hear the word the same way again. If you've never seen the show, don't worry. Here's everything you need. The show is called You. It started in 2018, blew up on Netflix, and ran for 5 seasons. And it did something almost no show dares to do. It puts you inside the mind of the villain, and it never lets you out. Here's the premise. Joe Goldberg is a charming, soft-spoken man who works in a bookstore. He loves books. He's funny, he's a little shy, he notices the lonely people around him and wants to protect them. He seems, honestly, like the best guy in the room. He is also a stalker, and a murderer. Joe meets a woman. He decides, almost instantly, that she is the one, his soulmate, his destiny. And then he begins. He follows her, he watches through her windows, he steals her phone and reads everything. He learns her routines, her friends, her fears. And anyone who threatens the relationship, a boyfriend, a suspicious friend, sometimes the woman herself, quietly disappears. Now here's the part that makes You different from every other thriller. The whole story is narrated by Joe himself, his voice, his inner monologue, soft, romantic, witty, reasonable. You hear every single thing he does explained from the inside, in the language of love. I had no choice. I'm protecting her. We're meant to be. And because you only ever hear his side, because the show barely lets anyone else speak, something disturbing happens in your own head. You start to like him. You start to root for him. You start to hope the murderer gets the girl. That is not an accident. That is the experiment, and you are the subject. So let's open the file and figure out what Joe actually is underneath the voice that's been lying to you the whole time. This is not a story about a man who loved too much. This is a story about a man who never learned what love is and built a life-sized counterfeit of it out of surveillance, control, and violence, then narrated it so beautifully that millions of people mistook it for romance. Joe Goldberg was not in love. Joe Goldberg was collecting people. Case file 3, open. Every case starts with a wound. Joe's has 2 people in it, his mother and his father. His father was violent. When young Joe's mother cheated, which she did, often, his father would try to force the boy to inform on her, and when Joe wouldn't, his father hurt him. In one memory, he put cigarettes out on his son's skin. That's the man who was supposed to teach him what strength looks like. And his mother. Joe idealized her. He called her his home. No matter where we were, she was home, but she repeatedly left him. She'd take him somewhere public and disappear to be with other men, leaving a small boy alone, waiting, watching the door, learning a lesson that would define his entire life. The person you love most will leave you, and you will never see it coming. Now here's where fiction touches real psychology. Children build their entire model of love from their first caregivers. Psychologists call it attachment. When that first bond is safe and reliable, a child grows up able to trust closeness. But when the person you depend on is a source of terror or abandonment or both, you develop what's called an insecure, disorganized attachment. You grow up craving love and terrified of it at the same time. You reach for people and brace to be left by them in the same motion. And then there was the cage. As a boy, Joe ended up in the care of a bookstore owner named Mr. Mooney. And Mooney's idea of discipline was to lock the child in a glass cage in the basement of the store, a see-through box. You can watch the world. The world can't reach you. You cannot get out. Hold that image. Because years later, Joe builds the exact same glass cage in his own bookstore, and he puts the people he loves inside it. The abused child became the keeper of the cage. That's not a metaphor the show reaches for. It's the literal architecture of his mind. A child who learns that love means abandonment has a problem he has to solve to survive. If closeness always ends in being left, how do you ever keep anyone? Joe's answer is the engine of the whole show. You don't earn love and trust it to stay. You take a person and you control every variable until they cannot leave. Watch how the mask is built piece by piece. First, the idealization. The moment Joe sees a woman, he doesn't see a person. He sees a solution. He instantly decides she is perfect, she is destiny, she is the one who will finally make him whole. Psychologists call this idealization, and it's not a compliment. It erases the real woman and replaces her with a fantasy that exists only to fix him. Then, the surveillance. He learns everything. Not to know her, to control her. Every secret he steals is a variable removed, a way she can surprise him or leave him eliminated in advance. Then, the isolation. Rivals, friends, anyone who might pull her out of his orbit, removed. Sometimes socially, sometimes permanently. And through all of it runs the voice, the narration. Joe never once thinks, I am stalking a woman and killing people. He thinks, I am protecting her. I would do anything for her. This is love. The monologue isn't just how the show is told, it's how Joe survives being Joe. It's a defense mechanism you can hear out loud. And here's the meter of the whole case. What he calls love and what he's actually doing move in opposite directions. The more he says love, the more it's control. By the end, the word and the act have nothing to do with each other at all. For a while, Joe gets away with the story he tells himself. He's the hero. The women are his salvation. The bodies are just obstacles that regrettably had to be moved. But the show does something brave, especially in its final seasons. It stops letting him narrate unopposed. It hands the microphone to his victims. Suddenly you hear the women Joe loved describe what it was actually like. To be watched, owned, cornered, and terrified by a man who called it devotion. And the spell breaks. The soft, reasonable voice you've been trusting for years is revealed as what it always was. The internal PR of a predator. And this is where the show turns a mirror on you. Because if you spend 5 seasons liking Joe, the show's final move is to make you sit with a very uncomfortable question. How did a charming voice get you to excuse all of that? How evilly were you convinced? Even the actor refused to let it slide. Penn Badgley, who plays Joe, watched fans fall in love with his character in real life and pushed back publicly. When a fan swooned online, he replied simply, "He is a murderer." He said the romance was deliberate. You're meant to fall in love with him. That's on us. And that the whole point was to eventually tear that romance down. That's the turning point, not a plot twist. A withdrawal of permission. The voice stops being allowed to lie. So name what Joe actually is. Because it isn't a man in love. Start with the foundation, that insecure, disorganized attachment. A person who learned love and abandonment as the same event. That's the crack everything is built on. On top of it, clinicians who've analyzed the character describe a blend. Not one tidy diagnosis, but a cluster. Traits of narcissism. Grandiosity, a hero complex, the unshakable belief that he is the good guy of every story. Traits of antisocial personality. Deceit, a stunning lack of remorse, treating other people as objects in his plot. And woven through it, obsessive, controlling attachment, what the culture loosely calls obsessive love. But that phrase is the trap, so let's be precise. Obsessive love is not love turned up too high. It's a different thing wearing love's clothes. Real love is oriented toward the other person, their freedom, their happiness, even when it costs you. Joe's obsession is oriented entirely toward himself. His fear of being left, his need to control the outcome. The woman is not the point. His terror of abandonment is the point. She's just the thing he grips to keep it away. That's why it always ends in the cage. Love says, I want you to be free and I hope you choose me. Joe's obsession says, I cannot survive you leaving, so you don't get to. One is connection. The other is captivity with better lighting. And now, the hardest part. The thing the show is really about, the narration. Joe's gift is that he can commit a monstrous act and, in the same breath, tell himself a story in which he's the victim, the hero, the romantic. Psychologists call this moral disengagement. The mental trick that lets a person do terrible things while feeling righteous. Euphemism, justification, blaming the victim. Joe's entire inner voice is a live, feature-length demonstration of it. And one honest caution, because this channel deals in real psychology, not diagnosis as insult. The overwhelming majority of people with abusive childhoods, insecure attachment, even obsessive tendencies, never hurt anyone. They are far more likely to be victims than predators. Joe is a fictional worst case, engineered for drama. The mechanism is real, the body count is television. So what does collecting people actually cost? For him and for us? For Joe, it costs him the very thing he's chasing. He wants more than anything to be loved, chosen, seen. But you cannot be loved by someone you've caged. Worship extracted by force isn't love, and some part of him always knows it, so the hunger never ends. He burns through person after person, always sure the next one will finally fix the wound, never understanding that the wound was never about them. But here's the consequence that should actually stay with you. The cost to you? The viewer. Because for 5 seasons, a charming voice narrated stalking as romance and murder as devotion, and it worked. Millions of people caught themselves rooting for him. That's not a flaw in you. That's the entire lesson. In real life, predators do not announce themselves. They are charming. They are soft-spoken. They tell you a beautiful story in which they are the hero, and their control is just how much they care. Joe Goldberg is fiction. The trick he uses is not. Understanding Joe is not forgiving Joe. Knowing why the wound formed does not unspill a single drop of what he did. A reason is never an excuse. Hold that line, but the file closes on this. Joe Goldberg spent his whole life terrified of one thing, being left the way his mother left him, and to make sure it could never happen again, he built glass cages and called them love. He was never collecting soulmates, he was collecting hostages against his own abandonment. And the most dangerous thing about him was never the violence, it was the voice. The soft, reasonable voice that could make even you, watching from the outside, call a cage a kind of home. That's the whole point of these files. The monsters don't sound like monsters, they sound like the narrator. Subscribe. The next case is already open.